Hey, house guests. This is Emmy with House of Chatter, and we are still talking about the Blake Lively lawsuit. But tonight, I kind of just wanted to have just a discussion, a conversation, just to highlight the, I don't know how you describe it, but maybe the turn of morality and Hollywood, and how, in this case, morality and ethics had a huge impact on this movie. Not only behind the scenes, but also for the fans. And so I was hoping once Brett comes on, we can have a little bit of a discussion about that. Because what I think it's interesting is we are all watching this case, not, well, some of us are watching this case like it's a train wreck, because it really is a train wreck. But we're watching this case, examining the ethics and the morals and how everybody is treating each other. And I don't think we've ever been faced with a morality problem like we have in this case. And the fact that there's such big backlash around it. There's big backlash that maybe Colleen Hoover isn't a good person in some people's eyes. Or maybe Colleen Hoover, Hollywood and the glitz and the glamour took over her, I guess, social work heart, which at its base is a very moral job to have. Gout says there was issues with morality when the Depp case. It's all subjective though. And that's true. Um, I followed the Depp case after the Depp case. So, um, and that itself was also a moral question, but this one just seems a little bit different. Um, this one was for the benefit of DV survivors. It was for the benefit of DV organizations. Whereas the Depp trial was at the benefit of either Amber Heard or Johnny Depp. It wasn't, I don't know, it wasn't, it was different. Let's just put it that way. And I'm having trouble with my words because my two kids downstairs will not stop fighting. I can hear them. But anyways, they're arguing. They're not math fighting at this point. But once I start hearing addition and subtraction equations, it might get a little hairy. And I might have to step out for a second. But anyways, so at the beginning of all this, it all starts with Colleen Hoover being a social worker. And when I learned about Colleen Hoover being a social worker, I kind of got in the back of my mind that maybe some of her books or work experience was going to come out in her writing and her literature. But her being a social worker and her knowledge of DV and patterns, because I guarantee you she's been trained to see patterns. If she was interested in getting an advanced degree in social work, they study relationships and all that stuff. But Colleen Hoover, in all aspects, started off as this, in my opinion, moral author who wanted to raise awareness for DV and to share her story. I'm just stopping to look at the comments. Gelth says, if we wanted proper morals, we could start with Judge Lyman, not removing himself with conflicts of interest. We could talk about Blake promising more work to others etc., etc. There's a lot. That is true. But he did. If did he disclose his previous interests? I'd have to talk to Leanne about that one. Pam says, I noticed on Prime if I rent Eleanor the Great, another Wayfarer production, proceeds go to women's organizations. They are trying to make a difference. I love that. I absolutely love that. Oh my gosh, that's amazing. That that says a lot because can we name any other big or little production company that does that or that does that so publicly, openly and freely? Not many. I've heard of no other movie studio doing that. So I'm so happy about that. So happy. Whoops, that was girls. Um Golf also says of people that changed or shifted their moral standings to go with the money and love bombing. You know, that's true. Colleen Hoover was probably, in my opinion, she was, how do I say this? She was, part of me thinks that she was manipulating Wayfarer or got it in her ear that she could have Wayfair donate money in her name so that she can get the tax write off, but herself does not have to make the actual donation. So it would be like, oh goodness, just 1 second. Sorry, guys. Um, but if she, what it seems like she wanted was to make a donation in her name, but not necessarily use her own money, but rather use the production studio, which I find really offensive because if she really did care about giving the money, she wouldn't have cared who it came from. She would have just done it out of the goodness of her heart. I mean, like 1%. She could have contributed 1%. I mean, she was able to buy a $5 million house in the Puget Sound of Washington, all cash. So, which side note, I don't know why she picked the area of Puget Sound that she did, but I did some research and it's definitely not a place that I think you'll ever see Blake Lively or Ryan Reynolds around. But I do think she made that move as kind of like if she fails in Texas as a social worker, she can still come to the Puget Sound area and continue a social work career, most likely for more money. That's what I think that was about. Um, my theory only. Um, but we could also talk about. Oh, I'm skipping that, Golf. Pam. I haven't ever noticed that before any movie rentals about the donations. Ooh, this one, Golf, you're right. Robin Williams used to do that and had that all in his writers that the studio had to help others. He actually had in his writers that they had to hire at least two I believe it was homeless people for work, which is amazing. Pam says Hoover is a social worker. Hoover is a social worker, believe it or not. That is her day job, her, I guess, part-time job or side hustle was writing books, and and I thought she was like a newer writer, like she wrote It Ends With Us and it became big, and she was like this brand new author with this amazing book. But I didn't know that she had actually been writing for much longer, like what, a decade, maybe 2 decades, for a really long time. So part of me thinks that what really happened is she was an author and she had a small following. And as time grew and as she wrote more, she grew her community. And then her community was large enough. And then what Justin did was incorporate himself in her community. And when I say incorporate, he made those book readers and her fans participate through social media, through what the script writing, all of that. So he integrated into Colleen Hoover's community. And that community became Justin's community. Now, why was it kind of like seamless? Colleen Hoover's group kind of gravitated to Justin's group. Well, because at that time they had the same or similar drives, morals, ethics. Hey, let's make a movie and have some of the proceeds benefit DV organizations. And as Colleen Hoover should know, you know, putting back into that system helps her community and her caseload as well. But Blake's mistake is that she did not integrate into that community. She tried to get Colleen Hoover to integrate into her community. And Blake Lively's community, it turns out to be pretty small because it was never big in the first place. That's what I think what happened. And so Blake Lively not integrating into a community, there was going to be backlash. And I think that's kind of what happened. It's kind of like Punch. The little cute little monkey. He didn't integrate into the community, and he was being bullied. And I kind of think that that's what happened to Blake Lively. She just got shunned by that community. Gout says about Robin Williams, up to 15 people, not just 2. He wanted a percentage of the crew to be homeless people. And, I love that about Robin Williams. I always will love that about Robin Williams. Pam says, I'm just thinking about her son being actually inappropriate and how she swept that under the rug. She's not fit to be a social worker. I would agree. I agree. It's appalling that things happen like that. Interesting. I feel so bad for the baby monkey. I feel really bad for the baby monkey. I can relate to that baby monkey, and that'll be a different live. But yeah. But anyways, yeah. Colleen Hoover allowed herself to be love bombed and to be swayed, I think, by the glitz and glamour of Hollywood. I think once Blake Lively got into the picture, Colleen Hoover's maybe intentions or goals changed a little bit, and she saw a way to, well, it's like Blake Lively said, as long as Colleen has her rights, she would follow her anywhere. But yet, even after the premiere of It Ends With Us, and after Blake Lively glowingly commented on Colleen Hoover and how amazing she was, there was no, oh, Blake Lively and Colleen Hoover, we're going to make this movie, or we're going to do this book, or we're going to do this together. There was none of that. So, did Blake Lively really mean that? Or was she just love bombing and talking out of the other side of her mouth? Anyway, I'm out. I need to stand on my morals and get food before my moral compass drives me off the wall. Amy, you know how to contact me if and when you're ready. Oh, get some good food. I still haven't found that ingredient you sent me. I'll keep looking for it though. Um, but yeah, I think that once people found out about Colleen Hoover, oh, I think we have our guest. I'm going to add you to the stage if you can hear me.
I can hear you. Hey, how you doing?
Hey, how are you doing?
Not too
Welcome to
bad.
House of Chatter, where we are talking about the morality of everything in Hollywood, including this movie.
Hmm.
So, what do you think as far as, or what are your thoughts as far as morality in this movie? And what do you think happened?
Well, that's kind of an interesting question because it ends with us, and Wayfarer Studios is really about human stories about growth and about change. And so this movie clearly they set out more than just the fact that Colleen was a bestseller at the time and she was popular. It was something that was directly in line with Wayfarer's identity. And I think that always contrasted with a lot of the work that Ryan and Blake have done, where they've done work that I don't know if it really has that same meaning and growth. And when you put people together like that, I guess the question is, what happens, right?
That's exactly right. I think that's what happened. Pam made an interesting comment. She said that she had watched Eleanor the Great on Amazon,
Hmm.
and at the end of that movie, there was let me pull it back up. There was proceeds. She said, I noticed on Prime, if I rent Eleanor the Great, another Wayfarer production, proceeds go to women's organizations. They are trying to make a difference.
Hmm.
And I was commenting on how I have never seen that in any film credits or anything, that they're openly, donating to other organizations. Like, that's kind of like a rarity in Hollywood to be so open about that.
Well, they're trying to integrate public good into, like, I mean, that's the way for a mission, integrate public good into the very work that they're doing. And it's a lot like B class corporations or public benefit corporations that they've started to do, especially in California and British Columbia, when part of the policy, the ideology, like the core tenets of the organization is to do good and to do something that's of public benefit. And so you can see that in the way that Wayfair has worked in the past and how they've continued to work, although it's kind of become into this major conflict now.
Do you think as a society we're ready for Hollywood to be so charitable?
Well, I mean, Hollywood is always charitable. I mean, it's one of those things where you can't really, even major corporations, they've learned if you don't act charitably, that your public relations just fall flat. The issue is sincere charity that follows up with it, like that you actually have values that go through with it. I mean, it's you can't really. I mean, Harvey Weinstein himself was giving to women's charities, but it's the difference between the charitable giving and the actions behind it that are even more powerful. Because charity is can be like buying PR if you're not careful about it. That's one of the problems with it. Is that charity needs to be heartfelt, sincere, and followed by consistent action. I mean, and when that happens in Hollywood, that is something different. There are people who have believed that. But I mean, we went through a very big time of influencers, and you think of how Gen Z's kind of grown up to value wealth in a different way than a lot of other generations have, and that's largely because of a lot of the stuff this generation has been through. And it asks that question: do I believe Hollywood could be good from this and can take Wayfarer's example and make that a basis of practice? Yeah. Do I think that lots of this internal growth is an important part of the conversation in cinema? Yeah, growth hasn't been a big part of cinema as a conversation for a very long time. And that's one of the things I like about Wayfarer as a company and what they were doing, especially with It Ends With Us. But how do you contrast that with, Ryan, who's made movies about Ryan Reynolds for a very long time? It's just two very different worlds. And the way that they collided was, I don't know, what we have now, right?
Right. Do you think the aftermath of It Ends With Us, with Blake Lively winning the Time 100 and her going on to do press, do you think that kind of exposed the real morality of things? Because what was it, in August, she put out a couple of Instagram stories about, domestic violence resources, and then we didn't really see anything else. Meanwhile, Justin Baldoni is basically doing a press tour and giving out those resources, but we really don't. I mean, it's like when the Time 100 came out, it was like, how did she earn that if she really didn't do much? You know what I mean?
I know what you mean. I think there's a lot of factors that go into it. Uh, Print media has really, really been suffering for a long time. So, and I have a lot of friends who are in print media who are like, trying to really preserve that journalistic tradition and integrity as we go into a new world with artificial intelligence. This is well beyond blogs. This is well beyond anything else. And we're like having, this is journalism right now. We're having this conversation. And a lot of these big magazines, they're looking for they're looking for investment. They're looking for return on investment. And having some like a big name after Deadpool and It Ends With Us, that's a lot of magazines to sell. That's a lot of clicks on the website. And that's the danger, because we got to a similar thing with the Golden Globes, where they were talking about VIP packages for a while that were pay to play. They eventually removed those. My friend Angela brought those to my attention. And it's in that weird state with journalism. And that's kind of the same thing. You go to Hollywood Reporter and a lot of these Pence media organizations, and how they're trying to manage to do business in a new world. And it really begs a question of, how do you maintain integrity in this new world of media, in this new world of content creators for these flagship magazines that have defined culture for generations? And how do you really deal with the fragmentation of media that occurs, and how do you deal with these cultural icons? It becomes a difficult question, because these magazines are fighting for their survival. I can certainly understand that, but I still don't think that was one of the best decisions, and that may have been something developed well before a lot of the drama, because I don't know. In all honesty, Blake Lively would not be one of my choices for the Time 100, given what occurred at the end of given what occurred at the end of what It Ends With Us. Oh, that's a mouthful to say. Given at the end of It Ends With Us. But yeah, I don't know. It reeks a lot of influence and how it plays out in Hollywood. And going back, because then we're going to talk a little about like morality and good and evil in Hollywood, right? And that's one of those things where I just wonder about, because earlier on, like I don't know, Blake, I don't know. I've never felt like she's really put herself out there to do something genuinely good. And when she does, it's tied to Colleen Hoover, who from self-publication is suddenly a best-selling and a New York Times author. And there's franchise and there's money there. And unlike any other project that Blake has ever taken on in her career, except for the fact that she's a bestseller, she's writing books, and she's printing money for herself. And it's one of those things where whoever has access to Colleen at that time would be able to print money for their own production company if they had that proximity. And that's exactly why I have issues kind of with the lawsuit. But I don't want to take up too much space. But does that make sense to you?
Yeah, it does. I think there's a definite split between mainstream media and social media, and at the digital age that we're in, those intertwine heavily.
Hmm.
And you can see that Leslie Sloan utilized that in the whole PR smear campaign against Justin Baldoni, because I think that there was a smear campaign happening, but it was more against Justin Baldoni than anything. And then after the premiere, it kind of switched from, you know, all of the book fans having backlash against Blake Lively. But I think what Blake Lively didn't realize is that journalism is intertwined both in mainstream media and in print, and also
Hmm.
on social media with the social media influencers. You know, you have a large group of people who mostly get their news from social media. And who are they going to get that news from? The influencers. And then
Hmm.
you have the other side of the population who's getting their information from mainstream media. And they have no idea that Blake Lively is suing. And they have no idea that Blake Lively is alleging, you know, actual harassment and all this stuff. And it's like a wall, you know, and
I
it's interesting the way that things are going.
Well, I mean, I don't know if it's so much a wall as a reality of consolidation in Hollywood. Like you look at the consolidation of major agencies, when there used to be a very big diversity of agencies, and it's along the same line as the consolidation of media companies, like the whole Paramount thing that's going on. Um, it makes it more difficult, especially when these trade magazines are really relying on inside information and access to actors and creators. Uh, and it's kind of known sometimes that when you don't say something favorable about someone within an agency, that certain agencies may be more restrictive of their other talent in turn. And it creates a power dynamic that can have an impact on journalism. And so it's just one of those things where you want to make sure you're picking actors with integrity, who have principles, so that you're not put into a position where to protect the show, you're leveraging power. Um, and that is what really kind of it's a problem of the commons where it impacts the ecosystem of cinema and art in this way. And does that make sense? I don't want to go on too long about that. Do you know much about the problem of the commons?
um you know, I would say that Hollywood would have an answer to actors and I guess other crew members going to the media. I would think that everybody would have a non-disclosure or disparagement clause, which I think Blake had, but blatantly ignored it. And if she had it, I'm wondering if anybody else had the same clause, because then it becomes not only a PR issue, but then a legal issue, and then a whole snowball of things.
Probably. I just want to go back because I just want to make sure something's understood. I was talking about just when we were talking about the trades like Hollywood Reporter or Rolling Stone, these major news organizations, that a lot of times if they say something unfavorable to a specific client for a talent agency, there can be some restriction in access. And that access is something that they depend on for their livelihood. And so that was to answer your question about the Times 100 and kind of just the culture of journalism right now. But going to NDAs, NDAs have been a very difficult conversation because on one hand, you can ruin a movie by spoiling it. Like that, that's a reality, and that can completely take the wind out of your sails. It can blow things up. But NDAs, even the case we've seen with others, have always been fundamentally overused, and they've been very strong and very restrictive, especially when you have something to hide. And that's different than an intellectual property NDA. Uh, but when it comes down to protecting a performer's brand when they've misbehaved with NDAs, that becomes a more complicated question. And what do you think about NDAs being used to protect brands for performers who are not living up to the character that they sell?
I think we're seeing that with Blake Lively right now. She's not selling the character or the sale of her. I don't even know what type of persona that she's got. I mean, she's tried so many different personas, the lifestyle branding, the mocktail branding that went into the booze branding that, you know, and then that intertwined with It Ends With Us, and she kind of got exposed for a lot more than what she bargained for. But I do agree that, you know, if a news agency or whatever doesn't get their sources, like for example Leslie Sloan or Stephanie Jones, you know, they kind of make or break you because they're the sources and they're the ones that are feeding all the information. And I know that Hollywood is a very small town, but it seems even smaller when you have larger PR groups that are kind of controlling everything.
Well, I mean, they're the ones who have developed the relationships over the years, and those relationships are very powerful. But I don't know. It's one of those things where, going back to Wayfarer, is that if you're looking at growth and good, it's no longer about relationships. It's about something you can kind of excel at and something you can push forward with. And looking at things like Eleanor the Great, and especially like Colleen Hoover, It Ends With Us, that really must have upset a lot of people in Hollywood. The fact that Colleen Hoover went with Wayfarer, you know, this young upstart company backed by Steve, right? That must have ruffled a lot of feathers.
You know, I didn't even think about that. I didn't even think about that whole aspect. So, you know, that makes a lot of sense with Sony putting so much pressure on Wayfair, you
Hmm.
know, because it's almost like maybe Sony felt that they missed out on something. And so when Wayfair was out, you know, shopping partnerships, maybe I kind of think that maybe they went to Sony first and they said, yes, of course.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but you're right. I didn't think of that perspective.
Well, I didn't really think about it to this moment, but you know, you're looking at these big companies who have a certain way of doing things, and then you know, there's a new kid on the block. There's always a bit of a reaction to it, and I can't always help but wonder how much of just how things kind of played out on It Ends With Us was really trying to navigate this new kid on the block and this new turf with Wayfair and a new way of doing business that I don't think Blake has ever had done business with anyone like Wayfair before. They've never had someone who was value forward, not charity as a point of PR or as reputation management, but as something that was practiced and is sincere, right? Like I'm a big because one of the things I had some really interesting conversations with some different Baha'i, and one of the things I found really interesting is the concept of art as worship, and that's something that I share from like the indigenous heritage that I have and the stuff I learned in Sweat Lodge, is that it's seen everyone has a gift and it's part of your life's task to bring your gift into the world, and art and developing that it's a big part of it. And when I first kind of tried to figure things out with Ryan, I tried to approach it from the same way, from the indigenous way of thinking and the gifts. And it wasn't, I don't know, I don't think he could even comprehend it or think about it. And I think that's a lot of the ways people have to look. I think that's how a lot of people might look at Wayfarer. I think some people are coming around now to their way of doing things, but with everything with AI, with everything that's going on, if you're not doing something that's emotionally fulfilling in your art form and you're reducing it just to commercialism, what's the difference between just having a robot do it essentially with artificial intelligence and having humans do it? If you're having humans doing it, you may as well make it meaningful. I would say I have a lot of overlap with Baha'i, um, and I've learned about them for a long time. And there's a lot of overlap with indigenous values, and I genuinely value my conversations with the Baha'i faith because there's a lot of overlap in the way we think. But I'm not at that point where Baha'i. I'm just learning from it at this point because that's just always how I've seen things. I've tried to learn from every religion, every wisdom tradition that I can. And Baha'i is one that I studied in university, and it's strange that I came into contact with the Baha'i faith, especially because their first connection with indigenous peoples was through someone who was very close to one of the biggest leaders for my people, Lou Riel, who was basically the rebel leader in Manitoba that fought for the Métis people and Métis identity. And his secretary actually became Baha'i, and he was trying to preserve a lot of our history. So it just feels very fated that I ended up in this situation with the Baha'i. And so I'm very much exploring that historical connection or serendipity or like fate. I don't know what it is, but something in my people's past and my family's past, showed up tied to the Baha'i. And I think now in this fight with what's going on, I think that means something. So I guess that answers the question, right?
I think how do I put this? I'm sorry, I'm having such a fibromyalgia brain fog now that like
Are you okay?
Yeah, I just get brain fog because stress and sleep and life. But anyways, I'm gonna put up Pam's thing, but I believe that there is something deeper on a spiritual level that is happening between Wayfarer and the whole Blake Lively, Ryan Reynolds. I think it's like a really good example of, and I don't mean to be disrespectful, but like modern version of a holy war, good versus evil, truth versus lies, bad versus good, loyalty versus, backstabbing. We have all of those elements. We have including racism versus diversity. I mean, we've seen a lot of that throughout the movie, and from Blake Lively, just a lot of the negativity, the closed-mindedness, the disrespect for religion, race, cultural considerations. And then on the other side, you see Wayfarer and Justin Baldoni trying to share themselves, trying to be open, honest, transparent. They ask permission to, talk about personal things. We saw in Justin Baldoni's deposition that he asked Blake Lively if it was okay to share his, his faith, his beliefs on his faith. And she was accepting at first, but then she turns around and puts in a lawsuit like it's the world's worst thing.
Honestly, like I said, I've been learning more about the Baha'i faith recently, and one of the things about it is how art is worship. It's a big part of the culture, and so it seems like an unreasonable thing to ask a Baha'i person to not have parts of their faith in their creative work because that is part of their religious view, and so it's a reasonable accommodation to understand that that's just how they view the world and that's part of their work. And I don't agree with trying to secularize that relationship because you joined a company like Wayfarer that is very forward about what they believe and what they want and what the culture they want. They don't hide anything from that. And if anyone's kind of working with them, you kind of know what you're getting into because it's very clear what their priorities are. And it's very arrogant to go into someone else's space and try and enforce your worldview on them. I mean, that is kind of colonialist, right? How complex that term is. You're not trying to integrate and understand the person, understand their ways. And that's for me, that's what I was taught is you learn people's ways, respect them, and you learn how to integrate and work with them as much as you can. There's always complex issues, and it's not a mindless process. But I just don't think that Blake Lively knew how to approach a different culture, to be honest, because I think she's a very monocultural person that doesn't know how to integrate to other cultures. If you know, like one of the things, it's something that Métis people do all the time, and Indigenous people do all the time, but Métis are like specialists at it, is something called code switching. A lot of Black Americans do that, where, they'll speak linguistically very different to different sets of peers in order to communicate or be accepted. And I don't think Blake Lively has ever had to code switch in her life. And it seems like from what I have read in the filings that she was expecting Wayfarer to code switch to her on their set. And I just think that's absolutely inappropriate. They shouldn't have to be code switching for her.
That's a good point, and I totally agree with you. I have worked in religious hospitals where they tell you, they tell you their mission statement, but in the application process, they actually ask you, are you okay with prayer? Are you okay with religious conversations? They kind of like make sure that you know what you're getting into, but they're also, you also have to answer these questions to make sure that you're appropriate for their hospital, so that you don't have any, I don't know, difficulties working in that type of setting. I've worked in Adventist hospitals, I worked in Catholic hospitals, and they all ask similar questions. And I'm not sure if that would have helped or harmed in this case. um oh Sorry, sidetracked. But I agree. At the hospital I work at, they pray before every meeting, and that's not unusual. Um, so I'm wondering if Blake knew that ahead of time, would that have put Wayfarer in more jeopardy in the end? Does that make sense? Like,
Yeah, no, that makes sense. I don't know. There's some argument. I it takes 10 seconds to look into Wayfarer and look at, like, we want to be the light in the darkness to understand where they're coming from. And that just means doing your homework and knowing who we're dealing with. And, I'm just of view, like, you don't go into someone else's space and disrespect them. It's very rude. If I don't know. Yeah, I get, it's a question of whether it should be how explicit it was. If it was, I don't know, because I've not seen those conversations when Blake signed up and what they kind of discussed. So I'm not going to speculate on that. I mean, there's something to be said about making sure people understand that. And I don't know if that was said earlier on, but I think she would have general constructive knowledge of the Baha'i faith, especially because isn't Penn Badgley Baha'i? Isn't that one of her exes?
yeah, he converted, I believe, in 2015 or 2016. He's been open about it, but I'm not sure Blake Lively realized that, and I'm not sure he was of that faith when they were dating.
I don't know. It's one of those things where I think there's so many, like, very well-known actors like Rainn Wilson who are part of the Baha'i faith that I think in going with a company like that and just talking about it, I think there's a certain amount of constructive knowledge. And I think it is up to you to do the research when you're working with a company that has values. Any company you go to, you want to research who they are, what they're doing, what their values, what their priorities are when you're deciding to work with them. Because you're an adult. You're making that decision to work with that company, knowing how they are, what they do. We're not talking about like a Harvey Weinstein situation where it's completely extreme. And that's it. I just don't see anything. I don't know. Maybe, who knows? For me, I find it hard for people to not know who the Baha'i is because it's one of the world religions, and it's just one of those things. I thought it's a generalized knowledge. But maybe that's just because there's more Baha'i around in Manitoba where I grew up and in Canada, because I think the Baha'i came to North America through Canada. So it's more common here. But I don't know.
So here's a question for you. Do you think Sony was moral in this situation?
I think Sony tries to make movies. I think honestly, there's a lot going on with Sony, and there's been a lot going on with a lot of companies since Me Too, and like really conversations about race and culture emerged. Sony, I don't know. Sony seemed, from what I read, to really just want to make the movie, to just do things professionally. And from what I read from the CEO of Sony, it was the CEO of the president. I can't remember what was that. It was a Greens. I'm trying to remember the man's name. He's one of the guys who said that Blake should have basically just protected the film.
Oh, Sanford. Yeah.
Yeah, Blake should have protected the film. And she's worked with Roger Stone. She's worked with Woody Allen. And she was defending Woody Allen at cons when they're making fun of him for Ronan Farrow's article about him. And it comes out that, of course, Woody Allen is tied towards Jeffrey Epstein. It's tied towards like the E-files and things like this. So it makes you just, sorry, I had to pop up. It makes you wonder about that, because I don't know, Sony has done some interesting things, and I'm not as familiar with the internal culture of Sony, so I won't speculate. But I think Sony wants everything, like most studios, to work and to go forward. And any company that doesn't want things to work and go forward is not going to be a business for very long. I guess that's it. You want talent that works with you, that talent's easy to work with, talent that's going to be towing the line. And you don't want people who are going to cause trouble or use too much influence or machinations to enrich themselves in a way that undermines the film and the reputation. That's just basic professionalism in business, right?
Yeah. I think the outlier with Sony was actually the president of marketing, Josh, was it Josh Greenstein?
Josh Greenstein, yeah.
Yeah, I think I don't know where his head was at, but I think he was kind of split down the middle too. Just from the documents, and I think everybody was frustrated by the end of of everything, and everybody just wanted to get across the finish line. But Blake Lively and Ryan Reynolds did such a good job of throwing what seems like a never-ending toddler tantrum at every turn that everybody just threw their hands up and said, "Fine, okay, stop the tantrum. We'll do it. Just get everybody across the finish line." Um, I'm not sure that was very smart on Blake Lively and Ryan Reynolds' part, because now they're essentially exposed for what they're doing. And if they can do it with Sony, why couldn't they do it with Paramount or Amazon? Or I think Amazon is part of Sony. No, I don't know. Everybody is part of everybody, it seems like. But I think they got exposed. I also think their karma came back to bite them. Justin Baldoni's mentioned a sequel to Blake at the beginning. If there's a sequel, you should direct it. But then you kind of learn that there wasn't going to be a sequel, and that's why Colleen Hoover got mad, and everybody else did too. But it's kind of like, if Blake Lively just played nice, maybe she could have gotten a sequel, or maybe some other work with Wayfarer or something other than, crickets and no future movies. And Ryan Reynolds, what his movies are being put on hold, except for bedtime stories on Nick Jr. So
Yeah,
and
that's
if she played nice, she could have had more.
I mean, that's kind of how things usually work, though. Is most people get in their own way, and most people are successful until they. Once you get a certain point, success is dependent on you failing and you tripping and you not monitoring your own behavior, not monitoring your own ethics, not maintaining your sense of professionalism and understanding. And that's usually when things happen. Your ego gets out of control, you push too hard, and you hurt yourself and others around you. And it always seems like it makes no sense. And there's always clear decisions to move forward with. But that's just how it works when you get to that state. When you lose touch with yourself, you lose touch with like that real part of yourself, then you kind of make a ton of mistakes and you make some bad decisions. And it's sometimes very hard to come back from those bad decisions. So
I feel like Blake Lively's made a lot of bad decisions and they're just like never ending. But I do think that maybe this might be her last bad decision because I think she's out of Hollywood second, third, or fourth chances, in,
mm,
in my opinion. Like, I don't see her ever going to Matt Damon's production company.
mm. I read the emails when I read those emails when they came out, the most recent unsealing on some of the ways that, like, say Ryan was talking to Patrick Whitsell at WME. I couldn't process it for a very long time because I can't even imagine ever getting an email like that. I have never gotten an email like that in my entire life. And if I got emails the way Ryan writes them, I wouldn't know what to do with them. Like, what do you even like? They're so disconnected from the professionalism I would expect in that environment that I wouldn't even know how to respond to half of those. Like, I wouldn't know what to write back
You
because,
know
like,
what? He's writing in characters what it looks like. Like he's writing a like a Deadpool, like those emails. There is
you
no acting with Ryan Reynolds. He doesn't act. He's talks. And those emails like proved it. He talks the way that he talks in movies.
but I thought at the very least you just have like a professional communication for things like that. And I don't know, like the whole taint thing. It was just, Jesus, like I don't understand these things. Like, I have never received professional communication my entire life like that. The one with Colleen Hoover about, just it's so over the top that like I can't even call it love bombing because I would like it'd be stunning. So I don't know. Like, I just I don't know how anyone gets that email and just responds to it without going, this is strange. Like, I honestly still have no words to process that after it. And it was after I read all the emails, I really came around to fully support Justin Baldoni and Wayfarer because it's all laid bare. Like the professionalism, the way they're treating people, and just the strange behavior that was occurring on set with Ryan and Blake. It's very easy for me now when I have full situational awareness to see who I think was in the right in this entire situation. So I'm just still stunned by the way they wrote.
Pam says it's absolutely Deadpool writing emails. I swear they are using too many rugs.
I actually think that it because I kind of don't feel like it was Deadpool. I think Deadpool's a little more of an aggressive version of that. It was a very nice Deadpool. It was a very like I don't know, a lot softer, but more strange in a certain way because Deadpool has a certain tempo to him. I didn't see Ryan's emails as just Deadpool writing. I thought that's more Ryan, but maybe I don't know. It's very different from how he presents himself publicly and the way he communicates, right? Um, and that's one of the things he had a something on his bio back, and I think It said the part of my personality that the focus groups liked. You know what I mean? Because Ryan, he's got a full personality when writing those emails. Uh, and it's weird because when I first got involved in this, I felt immediately sympathetic. Like when I first got into these things with like Free Guy and Mythic Quest and all the stuff with Aiko, um, I felt bad for Ryan. Like I felt like this is an unhappy person. This is a guy who has a lot but doesn't really have a lot. And I don't know. It's one of these things where hurt people, and I don't know if what you can do about that, what you can do about Ryan and about the way I guess, how he sees the world. Um, because he's looking at Justin like he's this horrible person, and I can't find any evidence of it. Even if I take all of their accusations at face value, I still bias towards, I still think Wayfarer was acting in an honorable manner. I don't see them as acting dishonorably or unethically. And it's hard that there's no self-reflection in the emails from Ryan about the situation. And I've often wondered what like he would think about, like, because I've confronted him on some things in the past, and that's been a very long paper trail that I've been dealing with Disney and everybody. And I'm trying to sort that out better. But I don't know much about Rob except that there was that one thing where there's a character named Aiko, and that's a whole rabbit hole if you want to go look at Aiko's ex. I don't know. I started out wanting to appeal to Ryan's better nature and I invite him to Sweat Lodge at one point to resolve these issues, and nothing happened. Leslie Sloan got back to me, another matter, and it. I don't know. I really think this is one of the most needless situations and needless conflicts that ego brings people into, or anger, or whatever that thing is inside someone that makes you want to feel better than someone or be cruel to someone. Because I don't even really necessarily understand that. And I've had to really struggle in the last few years to understand that part of people and how that works in entertainment Hollywood, because of how people see that image and fame is so powerful. And that's when we get back to like, is the pursuit of fame evil, or does pursuing fame inevitably bring evil into your life? I mean, I would argue even just being around it, like Aiko and I were running a video game company. I wanted to do indie film, and just doing that, we had something like this get brought into our life. And that's a hard thing because, Aiko doesn't want anything like that. She's a composer. She's an artist. She wants to live in a very pure space. Is it just that whenever you get involved with all of these uncontrollable desires, that evil kind of sneaks in, right? I think bullies hate themselves. I think that too. Yeah, that's what I said. I actually feel bad for Ryan, honestly. I mean, I can't excuse some of the behavior he's had towards me and allegedly with Aiko and I and stuff, but I actually feel bad. Like I think he does feel quite badly about himself, and that never sits well with me. I don't want anyone to feel terrible or hate themselves. So it's not I get no joy out of anyone suffering whatsoever, even if it's something they do to themselves. So,
It's interesting that you mentioned wounded and hurt, because if you look at Ryan Reynolds, he's been open about what he's experienced with his dad.
yeah.
And then Justin Baldoni has also been open and honest about his past traumas. And they're each a different wounded person on the spectrum. You have Ryan Reynolds, who is totally, in my opinion, and I don't know him, but just seeing, kind of what I think might be explosive anger and abusive behavior. He's on one end of the spectrum, right? He wants to hurt, he wants to punish, he wants to make you feel tiny. He's going to take out all of his aggression on you. And then you have the other side of Justin Baldoni, who is wounded in his own right, but he's praying for you. As he's going through this abuse, he's praying for you. He's praying that you do better, or experience something better. And he wants to work with you, and he wants to find common ground. Whereas Ryan Reynolds, I don't think there's any common ground to be found. And it's interesting because it's two wounded people, but they're responding in totally different ways.
Isn't that the whole Atlas Ryle dynamic from That's With Us, though? Like, that's the conversation, right?
Yeah, yes, that's very true. Baldoni is trying to heal. Ryan thinks he's
Oops.
just, but I think you're correct, Pam, on that. Ryan thinks that he can do no wrong, which is the main problem of this whole thing, in my opinion.
I don't know. If you think you can do no wrong, then you're already in the wrong. I mean, we're all human, we're all fallible. There's no escape for fallibility in this lifetime. I mean, it's the basic Socrates. I'm the wisest man in Greece because I know I'm a fool. So that's a silly thing. If you ever think that you're infallible, you're being silly. There's no way around it. Like, everyone is fallible. Everyone makes mistakes. And that can be very, in a high stakes environment like Hollywood, that can be very difficult to deal with. And one of the things I think about fame is that there's an addictive quality to it. There's that Buddha saying, riches will ruin the fool. It's the same thing with fame. Fame will ruin the fool. There's a concept called situational narcissism. So you don't actually have full narcissistic personality disorder, but the situation, how you're treated, leads towards narcissistic behavior, because you're so used to people being sycophantic or treating you a certain way. And I do see that a little bit with the emails, that when people email Ryan back, instead of a normal relationship, is like, dude, that was a bit much. What do you mean? Can you clarify a little bit? You're a bit all over the place. Let's work this out, right? That's a normal kind of response, but these people kind of send back the same energy and send back the same thing, when most people don't. Maybe it's a Hollywood thing, but most people don't talk like that in real life. Most people don't work like that in real life. That's not a normal response. That's a sycophantic response in many regards. And that sycophancy can be extremely isolating. People just doing things to support you, not because they believe in you, but because they're afraid of you or they need something to you, that messes up your psyche. And it's one of those things, I think, is that a lot of people, when they fall, they want to believe that other people would fall just as much like them, because then it rationalizes their choices. And that goes back to Wayfarer. They're doing this. They're making films. They're succeeding in Hollywood. They're building a new path, and they're not making the same choices that other people made. And so that creates cognitive dissonance. And that cognitive dissonance can be very painful and manifests itself in very strange ways that can be extremely, extreme, like we've kind of seen. And in my personal experience, my opinion, I've seen that kind of pushback to the character that I believe I have. And it's a character that I see in Justin as well. It's a character I see in Wayfarer. It's a character that I hoped I would eventually see in Ryan. Right? Like, because I really hoped earlier on that, he could find something better for himself, because I just saw a very unhappy person that I felt genuinely bad for.
Yeah, I think he's got a lot of healing to do, a lot of work to do. Whatever his relationship with his dad, I think that should be mended, for him, just for him personally, and for the benefit of his children. And, you mentioned that that there is fear instead of genuine support.
Yeah.
And I think that is what happened to Blake Lively. On paper, there was a whole bunch of support, right? 17 or 19 PGA recommendation letters. But when everything hit the fan and they were looking for support and they were looking for someone to go on the record to defend Blake, she was met with crickets. Nobody wanted to go on the record for her. Nobody wanted to like defend her. None of the people in the PGA letters wanted to go on record in defense of her. And I hypothesized earlier that that could have probably been because of fear. Like, what really did happen behind the scenes to have them write recommendation letters, but then when their star producer, PGA holder, is, you know, getting trashed in the media, there's no one that sticks up for her. She's
Well,
kind of
that's
on her own.
well, that's it though. A lot of people don't. It's there's sometimes a lot of fair weather friends, and especially in an environment where there's so much limelight, right? People sometimes treat it as like an ends in its own, and they don't do things out of true loyalty. They don't do things out of earnest support or earnest actions, and that's what happens. If someone wasn't earnest in supporting you, they won't show up when it matters most. And it's the annoying thing is the person who's actually earnest, who will show up for you, who will actually fight for you, who will actually stick by you, is not the person who's going to tell you what you want to hear. And it's funny how easy it is to lose sight of, the conflict that's necessary to have good peers and good friendships when everyone is just blowing smoke. Like they're all gassing you up. And realizing that the people saying the kind words are actually sometimes the people who are hurting you. And it's funny. It's this cruel to be kind, right? It's a heck of a thing when you think about fame and Hollywood and everything that's going on, and a lot of the people who are so desperate in their lives that they're willing to sacrifice their integrity and their core just to get closer to something or some kind of imagined ideal or freedom. And it's always a myth, because fame doesn't change. Fame doesn't actually change anything physical about you, except that you can afford food, you can afford the things you need in life. That's just basic necessity. Once you get past the basic needs in life, everything else is a trap. It's a hedonistic treadmill. And the more powerful you get, the stronger you get, the more cautious you have to become. And that's that old saying. It's like, it's easier for camel to get through an eye of a needle than a rich man to heaven. It's not that rich men are not given salvation. It's just that it becomes difficult. It's spiritually, wealth means living life on hard mode. The same thing with power. And any trauma you have will be magnified 1,000-fold. And so it's dangerous. Power is a dangerous thing for yourself and others. And I think people seek after it without realizing how much it's going to take for them to keep themselves when they get it. And some people, it's a mercy not to succeed, not to get power, because it may have preserved some of the most precious things about you because you weren't ready for it. And I think maybe Ryan and Blake were people who just weren't ready for power.
I agree. I don't think they're emotionally mature to handle said power, but I also think their power is, um how do I say this, fake, an illusion, um bigger than what it really is, because what we've seen now is they may have been powerful during It Ends With Us, but in the aftermath, it's the studios that are holding the ground, and it's the studios that are holding their projects up. You know,
Yeah.
what was it? Ryan was love bombing Josh Greenstein, and he went from Sony to Paramount, and then, Ryan Reynolds had a movie with Paramount that was supposed to come out, and then it was shelved.
Hmm.
So, or was it Paramount or Apple? Something, and it was shelved.
I think it was Legendary, actually. No,
Legendary.
Legendary. Yeah.
Um, but now that they're kind of like a level, they're not in power when they're asking for their movies to be distributed. And so, they're kind of getting the hand slapped back at them, and they don't know what to do now. They just, you know, I have no idea what Blake Lively's doing. She's still doing like the Betty Boo stuff. And then Ryan is popping up on Instagram every now and then. Well, more frequently than what I've saw. But, I don't think they've been in this space before. They've never heard no. It's, they're,
I think they have. I
well, now,
think for a very long time, they heard a lot of no's. And it's almost like once they get past that wall, you never want to hear no again. It's like, I've heard no so many times in my life, but
true. Yeah, no, you're right. Because I keep forgetting. I want to think of Ryan Reynolds' career as just the Deadpool movies because that's what I remember. But I'm forgetting about, he was in that movie with Sandra Bullock, and he was in that movie Buried, and some other things, Waiting. Completely forgot about all those.
yeah.
And it's probably because I just remember Deadpool, but Deadpool has just been blasted all over the place, it seems like. But yeah, I don't know. Because I'm thinking about, Blake Lively and her comments on an interview saying, she's never heard no before and no one ever says no to her. And then we see what happens when she says no. It's big. It's toddler fit. That's all that's how I can describe it. Tantrums. I'm going to make your life a living, heck, just because you said no to me. It's almost like, with Ryan Reynolds and Sony not putting out a statement the way that he liked, he kept pushing and pushing and pushing. And if you look at the text messages, you see that Sony legal didn't want them to like put out a specific statement, and that's probably because Sony knew the truth and had the marketing materials and the surveys and all that stuff, and Sony couldn't say there was an organized smear campaign. That's what Ryan and Blake wanted. Blake and Ryan also wanted the cast to come in their defense after Wayfarer said no to them. It's just a tantrum. It's mommy and daddy games. It's childlike behavior. They can't accept the way things are until they get their way.
Well, it can also be, and this is just hypothetical, sometimes you have someone like a publicist who tries to construct a reality from it to make sure it looks as best as possible. And it's kind of a weird thing because sometimes a publicist can have a very strong influence over talent. And that can have, people might just do things for how it looks and they operate like, they're the face of a corporation and then they're puppeted. But none of that's kind of sincere. And it's important to think about that, right? Pam was just saying something about his career wasn't that great until Deadpool. And yeah, he basically was almost out of Hollywood after RIPD and Green Lantern. He only really got back after, what it seems like connections with Harvey Weinstein for Woman in Gold. And that was to Berlinale. And it was launched at Berlinale. And it seemed a lot like Deadpool was his like life raft for Hollywood. And I can imagine he never wants to return to that kind of desperation. I know the same thing where he was getting criticized for the plantation wedding. It seemed like that probably caused a lot of anxiety in him, and he never wanted to even open himself up to criticism again. And I've often wondered if that was part of the reason why he well, for many reasons, why he wasn't open to conversations about Indigenous issues in film that he's worked in and the IP that he's working on, especially as a Canadian who has put very Indigenous forward policy with group effort and other things. So I don't know. I try to look at a sympathetic possibility of each person and a malicious at the same time. And I have to deal with things on the tactical strategic level. But, I'm always hoping that there's going to be a soul in there somewhere and that can actually make a difference and that person can, change and help other people themselves. With Ryan, that's been getting harder and harder to do, to be honest.
What do you think it would take for a person like Ryan to be able to do that, if anything?
Sometimes I wonder if you've made too many deals with the wrong people. Um, just and that you can't ever walk back from it. Sometimes I worry that that's just, people are in too deep and they're just never going to dig themselves out because the cost of doing so is too high. So I don't know. I honestly, I came to a point with Ryan where I just like, I don't know. I had hope for the guy. And then I don't know. I don't know what to say with him. I don't know what to think about the guy.
And what about Blake? Same question.
I have genuinely never thought about Blake until it ends with us for the most part. Oh, I did a little bit before. I kind of actually thought because I didn't know these people and I'm suddenly thrust into these weird circumstances where there's potential references to my life and work and my relationships. And then there's like this whole secret where there's part of the IP is tied towards my people's history. Blake, I really, aside from seeing her in Green Lanterns, which I don't know. I just, to be honest, she was not someone I thought about until I kind of got entangled with Ryan again. I tend to be in a very different film space where I'm watching a lot of foreign film and a lot of action and different kind of things. I don't think I would have ever watched Gossip Girl or any real work that she's been in because it just never appealed to me, and her choices never appealed to me. Like I would have never watched Another Simple Favor unless I was involved in this situation. That's just not the kind of stuff I'd spend my time watching. So I didn't really think of her much at all.
Do you think that Blake or Ryan were ever really moral?
I honestly don't know them well enough to say that. I don't. My work experience with Ryan was rather limited and quick. And I very intentionally didn't go to, I historically on set, I've always been very cautious with the people I open up to emotionally. That included leads as well. And so Ryan wasn't an exception there. I was always very cautious. And that's because I've had, certain experiences about, finding out that people have other things in their mind. And I don't know. Sorry, I drifted off a second. I went to back old thoughts about being on set in Vancouver. What was the question again? Sorry.
You're fine. It's okay. If Blake or Ryan were ever moral, and what can they do to get back to the space, if anything?
Well, the traditional Indigenous thing would be to say, you guys should actually take everyone to a healing circle. Don't like Wayfarer. Don't leave Aiko and I out of it because we've got a lot of trauma and damage from this that we're still working out. But if everyone could actually go to that and actually, have a restorative process and work things through, where if everyone could actually come together and actually find a way forward from this without, this vindictive battle that I guess is taken to it. And if everyone can actually kind of have humility from it and to acknowledge missteps and that they wanted to move forward. Um, I don't know, maybe there's something salvageable there, but that's not something that a PR person can have. And that requires a lot of spiritual self-awareness and contemplation that completely changes the narrative of what's been done. And it's basically admitting publicly that you've been wrong. And then just falling on your sword, I guess. And a lot of people don't do that. A lot of people do that falsely too. So you have to be careful of it. But aside from, I guess, seeking forgiveness and admitting wrong, I don't know what else you could do. And to really conceive of being wrong-headed and acting in the wrong way is devastating to people who are not used to self-reflection or imperfection or who have an inflated ego. And salvation is almost impossible if your ego is, too big. So I don't know. There's paths forward that they could do to make things. I don't know what they could do with Wayfarer. That'd be with them. But if they honestly had a conversation about the pressures that drove them to this, and the mistakes they made from it, what they've done in the past, and they sought to go forward in a good way that was, quantifiable and seen, then maybe they could stop suffering as much. And then they would stop inflicting suffering on others, as I see it, because I feel that they inflicted suffering upon me and my wife. I don't know, saying pride is too much. Well, I don't think pride, I think there's different ways how pride should be approached in English. There's a healthy pride, there's an unhealthy pride. One type of pride is just a blindness to reality. Another thing about pride is to identify something within yourself that's worth defending and sticking by. And it gives you a feeling of hope, courage, and strength. And that's a different kind of pride because it's pride that stands on strong foundations. Pride that has no foundations always crumbles underneath you, right? And that's not real pride. That's a false pride. And I think that when you're in an environment where you're full of sycophants, you're stuck with fame, you're stuck with fear of failure, you're stuck with this, you get boxed in bit by bit, your world gets smaller, 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 until there's only like a little tiny little bit of who you are sitting in a box pushed aside somewhere that randomly comes out. And then you have this false persona that you keep trotting out and portraying and trying to somehow make yourself happy. That's not a strong foundation for pride. And I would say if they had a spiritual awakening of some sorts, I think that they might be able to redeem themselves somehow, but it would have to be sincere because many times people seek redemption, but it's not sincere. And that's something you should always be aware of because sincerity and authenticity are always the most important things when it comes to goodness, I think.
Do you think that this lawsuit and Wayfair will start kind of a change in Hollywood and entertainment?
I think it already has. I think it honestly has because the air is thin in Hollywood. So everyone has looked at Wayfarer in a way that they wouldn't have before. It would have just been a movie. It just would have went through. It's really funny. The values Wayfarer has stated is something that everyone has had to look into and they've had to self-reflect on it. And they've had to self-reflect on, Ryan, their relationship with him, their relationship with Blake, and their own relationship with power, because this whole lawsuit and the conversations around it has really just been a conversation about power, about ethics, in a way that was absolutely necessary. Like, I think that this Wayfarer conversation culturally is one of the more important conversations right now. And it's not simply a sideshow like people have kind of joked about. It's really a conversation about ethics in Hollywood, ethics in media. And that conversation about ethics is due, because it's more complex than slogans that can be co-opted or used for PR or manipulated by public relations, because it became a conversation about the role of public relations in media, in Hollywood, and how we have to look at the ethics of PR and the people we deal with, and who these PR people are as a person, because they're a big part of Hollywood's reality and the reality that's created for everyone. And when it comes to building authentic art in a time when it's threatened by artificial intelligence, um, you need to be more transparent about that. You need to be working with people that help can get your message out, but they hold you to a standard. And we can't just keep being stuck with this standardless way of thinking where we just keep trying to deceive someone to pull a fast one and treat everything with public relations like a con. Ashley Brion-Eve, the way she talks about public relations has really opened up my eyes to think about there's a wisdom, there's a kung fu to it, like there's an art form to it. And I've come to respect publicists more through this process, like the actual art of what it is to be a publicist, the martial art of publicity, and how there's Sith and there's Jedi when it comes down to it. And I think basically when a performer picks to go with the Sith, they make the same deal as you would with the Sith. You make the same deal of fear, of darkness, of anger. But if you go with a Jedi, you're going to be raised. You're going to have to go through some difficult times. You're going to have self-reflection, but you're going to keep your soul, and you're going to be able to look at yourself in the mirror at the end of the day. And because you're good doesn't mean you can't be successful. And that's why the Wayfarer conversation is important, because the view is somehow that you're a Rube if you're good, that you're the Starks, like that you're like going to get your head chopped off in the first season. Spoilers, of course. But that's not actually reality. Good people don't lose because good people care enough to think things through and fight hard because they care about what's going on. That's why they don't make these careless mistakes, because most mistakes are uncaring. And this view that people have that you have to be a nasty person, that you have to be a terrible person, it's just one side of the coin. And that's the dark side, like the evil that we kind of talk about. I'm always hesitant to call anything evil, but that's a dark path. And there are two ways, right? There's a righteous way to deal with things. There's a way with growth. I can't remember who said this, but the right path is the one that makes you grow the most. And if you're on a path that doesn't make you grow, that just lets you rely on the same way of thinking, the same way of acting, then you're usually going the wrong way. And what this really showed is people looking to grow. I read the emails, what Justin said, what Wayfarer said. These are people looking to grow. And I read what Ryan and Blake said. And these are people that aren't looking to grow. They're looking to maintain, to control, and to consume. And that is a path that, as we've seen, eventually leads to this. And we've seen it 1,000 times in Hollywood. So I think that Wayfarer is making an incredible difference with this fight. And I'm actually very happy to see it because it's what I always wanted. So
I love that. Now, here's a hard question.
okay.
What do you think of Colleen Hoover's transition from social worker to movie producer?
Well, I didn't know much about Colleen before this. And got to think about that. You're in a tough spot in Texas. You're in a small trailer with your kids. Your husband is away from you all the time doing long trucking home. That's a tough job. That's a tough spot to be in. And it's sometimes hard to get rid of that sense of, I guess, desperation, or like how poverty can affect someone. And even when you get stable, even when you get money, even when you become more successful, sometimes those feelings of deprivation never leave you. And maybe you make the wrong moral choices because you were too caught into the past, right? So I don't know. My understanding is she really connected with a lot of people, and that's how she got to where she is. And that Justin saw that and wanted and was, about that connection. And he was someone who was probably reading these books, who was looking into these things. Um, and I probably assume Emily seems like a reader, so I'm sure Emily probably read a lot of these. But it really is a shame that it ended up this way, because it's like the best laid plans of mice and men often go awry. And Colleen was building a lot. I don't know her books. I don't read them. I know that Aiko started reading It Ends With Us, and she thought she was a fantastic author. And I don't know why a lot of people, if you think of the situation when this started, where Ryan was, I contacted so many people in this conversation with Ryan, different organizations like I contacted Time's Up a long time ago with Aiko. We had a conversation there. Other conversations we had with like Composer Safety League and all these different organizations, all these unions and stuff, trying to resolve this. And people were afraid to go against it for their career, for their livelihood. And, I'm of the mind that I don't care about that as long as I got food on my table and I can feed my dog and I'm able to keep the lights on and keep it over my head. I don't need anything. I don't need much. But I guess some people want that in their life more than they want integrity. And I don't think you should ever trade a minor pleasure for the pride you get from integrity. And I can't imagine that Colleen is proud of herself. She came so far and went so many places. I can't imagine that right now she's at home and saying, you know what? I did right. I acted appropriately. And I think probably that choice will cost her something in her writing. It'll cost her something for who she is. And she may not even realize it for a long time, but I think she made the wrong call, abandoning Justin in this. I don't know what their friendship was like, but from what I understand, I just don't think she made the right call in this. And I think that it will haunt her for a very long time in her life and in her career, not just from the interviews she gives, but when she has to write and self-reflect, because as an author, you can't escape thinking. And I think as an author, you need to be very careful about the things you do in your life, because you're going to have to think about the consequences in a way that other people won't. So,
One last question. Who's
Sure.
going to win, the money or morality?
There's several games being played. There's always a concept of a Pythoric victory. Are you familiar with the concept?
No, explain it for us, please.
Basically, the Romans were at war with Greece, and they kept sending soldiers to Greece, and they keep getting their armies wiped out. But then they'd raise another army and they'd send it again to Greece, and then the Greeks would wipe them out again. But the Greeks continually whittled down their forces and were not able to replenish their losses. So it came to the point where they win, but they lose. And if they keep winning like that, they lose. Even if there's a no-win situation for Ryan and Blake, because winning is just as bad as losing. So I don't think there's any path where the money wins here, because winning is just as much a loss as losing. And I genuinely think for Ryan and Blake that this is a no-win situation. And it's because of everything else going on in the zeitgeist and everything else It's been happening in Hollywood and society. I just don't think that there's a path where they ever truly win coming out of this. Now, I think Wayfarer has already won a lot, but what they're fighting for now, I think, is to return to their path, as a company. And that's the same thing I'm fighting for, and I have been fighting for a long time. I don't think that it really matters what Judge Lyman does here, because we're in a different time with the court. It matters financially, but I don't think it really matters to the people, and to the people watching this, and to the people watching this case. Because you got to understand, people in Hollywood are already making up their mind about this, and making up their mind about the kind of world that they want, because they've felt the stress and the pain of the intensity of this world that, you can see a glimpse into it with Ryan and Blake through those emails. And I think a lot of people are reflecting that they don't want to live like that. They don't want to live in that fear, or in that kind of prison. And that's what this conversation with Justin Baldoni and with Wayfarer and with Ryan and Blake has really been about. The case is a sideshow to the bigger moral play that's ongoing. And I think that Wayfarer has already changed a lot of hearts and minds in Hollywood that don't want to do business like Ryan and Blake anymore. And they want something better. And there's going to be more and more people that want something better and want to build better things that are about growth, about humanity, and about, an ocean becomes a drop becomes the ocean. And I think that Wayfarer has fundamentally changed Hollywood. And that is a victory that no one can take away, because they have put their ideas and shown that they can actually stand up to some of the biggest names and biggest people. And whether they win or not, the next person will. And then the next person will. And then the next person will. And ultimately, it's always the good that wins at the end, because the good doesn't give up. Because these nasty people, they'll always break first. Because when you're nasty, you don't care enough. When good people care enough, they don't give up, and they endure no matter what. So, in the long run, it's the good that wins.
I think that's a beautiful way to end things. Thank you so much for your time.
Absolute pleasure.
I love this conversation. I would love to know more about your background and your cultural beliefs, and your experiences. And I just want to thank you for your input and this discussion today. So thank you for your time and joining me.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I genuinely appreciate it.
All right, house guests, I'll see you next time. And Brett, I'll catch you on email. And I hope everybody has a beautiful night and a beautiful weekend.
Okay, good night, everyone.
Bye, guys.